Chapter 4. The Incident at the Observatory. For the next several days, Daniel watched Rowan, Eric, and Molly very closely. In turn, they watched him. On the day after the bridge accident, Daniel followed Molly home from school, only to turn around and find Rowan following him. Daniel had been standing across the street from Molly's house, waiting for her to... Well, he didn't know exactly, but he was sure she was up to something strange. When he heard a sneeze behind him, sure enough, there was Rowan, looking miserable in a patch of pollen-dusted wildflowers. When pressed, Rowan claimed that his dog, Shaggy, had run off, but Daniel knew better. Daniel had seen Shaggy, and he was by far the oldest dog he'd ever met. Shaggy wouldn't be running anywhere. Rowan was a bizarre kid, no doubt, yet despite everything, the two were fast becoming friends. But Rowan's behavior was definitely strange. Sometimes he would put on his nose clip, or even stuff earplugs in his ears, for no reason whatsoever. And Rowan had a tendency to zone out. He'd be in the middle of a heated defense of pirating over detective work, and suddenly start staring off into space. Daniel had to practically shake him to get him to come back to Earth. Molly hung out with him occasionally, but she barely paid any attention to Daniel. Sometimes she would talk with Rowan about school or sports, but most of her time she spent with Eric. After the story of the rescue at the Tangle Creek Bridge, Daniel had decided that if there was a mystery to be solved here, the answer lay with Eric. He seemed nice enough, always smiling, always easygoing, but for some reason, Daniel had been unable to work up the courage to talk to him. Daniel had noticed that Eric missed a lot of school, and he suspected that it wasn't because of illness. Whatever the case, both Molly and Rowan were fiercely protective of him. Whenever Daniel started to ask questions, they would quickly change the subject. If he pressed on, they would eventually get mad and just walk away. Daniel had the feeling that if forced to choose between their secrets and him, they'd choose their secrets. All of which put Daniel into a rather foul mood during those next few weeks. His gloom and the increasingly secretive behavior of his new friends meant that when the first field trip of the year came around, he was ready for it. The visit to the Mount Noble Observatory was the one thing he'd been looking forward to since coming to Noble's Green. The observatory belonged to the university and had one of the most powerful telescopes in the country, as well as a planetarium, complete with a laser light star show. But best of all, the trip was a chance for Daniel to think about something other than his new stack of problems. When they arrived at the observatory, the students were given a half hour to tour the museum displays and gift shop. Like the rest of his classmates, Daniel was itching to blow his allowance on some souvenir junk, and was on his way to do just that when he saw Clay and Bud waiting for him outside the gift shop. As Bud looked his way, Daniel beat a quick retreat up a nearby staircase to avoid a potential pounding. When he reached the top, he found his way blocked. A large sign read, "No admittance. Exhibit closed for repairs," and the hall was roped off with yellow caution tape. But he didn't want to face Clay and Bud, and since there was no other way around, he slipped under the tape and went inside. The hall looked empty except for some sheets of drywall and a few power tools littering the floor. The room smelled of sawdust and fresh paint, just like the sort of place that would play havoc on Rowan's allergies. Although the electricity was off, the room was bright with daylight. It poured in through a giant hole in the outside wall, where the floor ended in a sheer drop. Peeking over the side, Daniel could see that they had started to erect scaffolding several floors below. Beyond that was nothing but empty air. It was a long way down the mountain from up here. In one corner of the hall, there was a large sheet of plastic billowing in the wind. Behind it, Daniel found an intact exhibit, complete with dioramas and photographs detailing the history of Mount Noble in the building of the observatory. Some of the photographs dated back to the beginning of the 20th century, when Noble's Green was just a burgeoning trade town. In one photograph, brown and blurry with age, a ragtag group of children stood with a bearded man, dressed in skins and a fur cap. The caption read, "Jonathan Noble and the survivors of the St. Albans fire." This photograph was taken after the survivors emerged from the wilderness of Mount Noble. There was more written there, something about the burning of an orphanage and how its children were all saved by a local trapper named Jonathan Noble. Daniel was just beginning to read about the suspected cause of the fire when he caught a whiff of something bad, something nauseatingly familiar. "Well, if it isn't Daniel, all by his lonesome." Daniel recognized the voice. It had the gravelly pitch of someone used to shouting. Clay was standing there in the doorway of the little history exhibit, blocking Daniel's exit. His arms were folded in front of him, and he was wearing an ugly smile. Bud was off to the side, writing "Bud Rules" in black marker across one of the walls. This was a bad situation. Here Daniel was, in a place that was off limits, with no teachers around, trapped with the two most dangerous kids in school. He didn't even have Molly to stick up for him now. This time, he was on his own. He remembered Clay's enemies list, and the thought made him queasy. "Where's your girlfriend?" asked Clay, looking around. Something occurred to Daniel then, giving him a tiny bit of hope that he hadn't had before. Clay was scared of something. He was being cautious, hesitant even. Maybe Rowan's threat about Eric still had a hold of that little thug. And if Daniel used it to his advantage, he just might make it out of here in one piece. "She's around," Daniel croaked. He hadn't realized it until now, but his throat had gone dry. He wondered if they could see his legs shaking. Maybe would they be satisfied that they had simply terrified him and leave it at that? Somehow Daniel doubted it. "In fact, Molly and Eric are on their way up here right now, so you'd better get out of my way." Then he did something either very brave or very crazy. He started walking straight toward them, as if they weren't even there. The way he figured it, he had one chance. Clay and Bud were both bigger than him, and Clay was certainly way stronger, but they weren't the brightest couple of kids. He needed to bluff them, and quick, before they recognized the lie on his face. Amazingly, it worked. At least it started to. Bud knitted his brow, clearly thrown by Daniel's brazen approach, and backed up a step to the right, giving Daniel just enough room to squeeze by. Clay, however, stood perfectly still, watching Daniel pass. He looked as if he were thinking so hard it hurt. Daniel was maybe 3 steps past him when he heard Clay sneer, "Ah, this is bull! He's up here all alone!" That's when Daniel ran. He sprinted as fast as he could on wobbly legs towards the stairs, not even daring to look back at the sound of footsteps pursuing him. He could feel someone's hot breath on the back of his neck, and tripped just as fingers grabbed at his shirt collar. Daniel skidded on his hands and knees and ended up in a pile on the floor, dangerously close to the exposed wall in the sheer drop down the mountainside. The bright sunlight was streaming in from outside, and Daniel shielded his eyes from the glare. He was dazed from his fall and blinded by the sun, but he could still hear Clay's mocking laughter somewhere in front of him. He was trapped between Clay and the deadly fall. The air around him smelled strongly of rotting stink, of dead things. "Nowhere to go, new kid. Might as well take what's coming to you." In a panic, Daniel got to his feet too fast and realized the room was spinning. He'd fallen harder than he thought, and now his vision was beginning to go dark with spots. Stumbling and blind, he tried to back away from Clay's taunting laughter. Daniel's eyes started to clear just in time to see Clay make a desperate grab for him. Daniel lunged backwards, but the look on Clay's face suddenly changed. The cruel smile disappeared, and his eyes went wide with fear. He shouted, "Wait! Look out!" It was too late. Daniel was already taking another step back. This time, he found only empty air. Daniel's stomach dropped out from under him as he tottered over, through the exposed wall, plummeting off the side of Mount Hope. All Daniel saw was the blurry shape of the scaffolding passing by him, and all he heard was the sound of blood pounding in his ears. Despite his panic, he found himself wondering whether he would feel it when he hit, or if he would just die instantly. Then he was no longer falling. Someone had a hold of him, and that someone was floating in midair. He turned his head and saw Eric smiling back at him. "Hi, Daniel. I guess it's time we talked, huh?"